Good morning, everyone. It's great to see you here with me today. My name is Allison Gagnon, and I'm on the faculty at the University of North Carolina School of the Arts in Winston-Salem. And my thing is collaborative piano, so that's the department that I'm in charge of. And so that actually has a few different aspects to it. I have graduate students who are majoring in collaborative repertoire, and then I teach some of the piano students introductory skills to playing with other people, and then I also coordinate our staff. So I put together all the pianists with all of their vocal and instrumental partners. So I'm very much in collaborative land all the time. And I'm really happy to be here. Caroline asked if I would speak about collaborative skills for young pianists and how to develop those. And I realize, having done this occasionally over time, that there can be a real gap between where I am and where you all are with your students, meaning that you're teaching them piano, they're all different sizes, and you have a lot of things to teach them, hello, in that time. And so, like, how do you teach them skills even when you don't have partners around? Because that can be a real challenge when you're with young people. So I decided what I would do is I'd tell you a little bit about sort of where I'm coming from in my background, and then talk about some of the concepts that we talk about in our collaborative training, and then kind of take a shift over to where I imagine you might be working with your students and some of the things that you can work on with them, whether or not there's a partner. And sometimes that the partner is you or another student. So, and then after we take a little break, I've actually invited, have the kind cooperation of a student of a former student. He's going to join us in the second part, and he's going to be my demo buddy. So we haven't practiced, so we'll hope that that is helpful, but I think that'll be a nice opportunity to try some things. So what I mean to say about the context of where I'm coming from is that I started learning the piano, taking piano lessons when I was very young. My mom started my older brother, and of course, as a younger sibling, I was just trying to imitate him, and so she thought, well, maybe I'll start her too. So she says I was about 3 when that happened, so I was already learning in that context, and I had a younger brother also. And then my mom and dad were teachers by training and by profession, but my dad played the violin, my mom sang and played the piano, and so you can imagine that my mother got us to do stuff in the family. So I just don't remember not playing with other people. And I know that that's not the case for every student who takes piano, young person who takes piano. But that's where I grew up. And then the teacher that I had after my mother, through my school years, she was also, she taught at the university and so on, but she was very much into accompanying herself. And so when I was a young teen, she paired me up with one of her sons, and his oboist friend. He played the flute and she played the oboe. And so we played together. And the oboe teacher coached us. And then when I went to university, I was still studying with her at the beginning, she paired me with a singer. So I had kind of priority treatment as an accompanying person. So I was having that opportunity outside my family also. And so even though I continued on solo training, and when I went to Vienna, I was a solo major, I knew that I really wanted to play with other people. And then as time went on, that was what I wanted to teach, because that was the repertoire that I knew. Work with singers, work with all different instruments, and I didn't feel as current with regular solo repertoire because that wasn't what I was playing so much of. So that's sort of where I am, and then I eventually was able to train specifically in collaborative piano for my master's and doctoral work, and then I drifted south to North Carolina from Cleveland, and thought I was coming for a year while I was going to finish my doctoral written work. And I said, you know, is there an accompanying class I could teach? Because I really just wanted to start doing that. I'd had a little bit of sort of mentoring in Cleveland at the Cleveland Institute. And so when I came here then, I taught the accompanying class for a year, just because they had it on the books, but there was nobody teaching it. And then subsequently, when I was thinking I was going to go back to Canada, where I'm from originally, they said, well, the dean would like you to start to design a curriculum for a graduate program. So that was in 1999. So I had this great chance to do this work at School of the Arts. So currently, as I say, my students, some of the students I see are quite young, in high school still, and then my majors are graduate students. So I think when you hang out with people that do a lot of playing for other people in their day-to-day, that they've maybe had some of those experiences, or they played in church, or they had opportunities in school, you know, these things sort of pop up. But That isn't always the case, and I'd like to think that, like any other skills, we can introduce skills to students that maybe don't have that exposure naturally, and then they might have the opportunity then to say, wow, I really enjoy this, or I really feel at home working with my friends doing this. So that's sort of where I'm coming from. Now, the handouts that I left at the front, they're essentially what you're going to see on the screen. I just didn't know what format you all are used to, and I thought, well, if you want to write anything down, you can write it on the papers in front of you, but you can look up also. And I'm going to try not to do this and read my screen up here and actually look at you and look at this. So anyway, that's a little bit of information about me. Now, may I just ask, so you all teach piano. Do any of you teach piano with partners of any kind? Yes. What do you have in your studio?
It's not special class. It's
right.
Not special arrangement. I just I have duet recital every December.
Okay, so you have your students playing in duets.
Duets of different kind. Duets with two piano students or a bigger group like quartets.
Uh-huh.
And also I teach them how to accompany the singers and instrumentalists like flute, violin, cello.
Oh, so you're set up so you can bring in partners.
Yes.
So not only piano duet. I'm repeating a little bit because they may not hear you on the live stream, but that way they'll know what you were talking about. So in this colleague's class, she has them learn how to work with singers and also with flute and strings. So let me just ask you, are the students that you have as partners, are they like siblings of students, or are they students of a teacher that you work with, or how do you find your partners?
All kinds.
All kinds.
Yeah, well, siblings, of course, it's the most comfortable for me and for them to do because they always can practice. If we put in two pianos, of course, it's issue.
Yes, two pianos is more.
If it's just four hands, it's at home the best way.
Good. So anybody else have that kind of? Yes, Kay. Yeah.
So in 2 weeks, I'm doing my duet recital where I've paired students of the same ability. Some of them are siblings, and then I have a lot of younger ones that
you play with.
Or my most advanced student can try to do that. I'm also a church musician and accompanist. So in the summers, my most advanced students come in and they get to have that experience of accompanying a whole church service where we prepared. So,
which is another skill, another kind of skill. Right, good. Oh, so you might be able to help me here with this presentation. No, that's great, because you have to, there's a lot of resourcefulness involved, but you can get lucky sometimes with either with colleagues or with situations where you can do things. It's wonderful. So so it may be that as we go, because I have no idea who's going to be here and everything, as we go, there might be things that you go, well, of course, I know that already. But maybe seeing it laid out will be something that you can use with your students, and you might have things to add. So let me just go ahead and, these are kind of my big three that I think about in concepts with the piano students when we first start. Because even when I have students in the high school and college intro class, some of them have never played with anybody else. Even duet. I mean, they've had a solo training. And so the place that I start with that is I talk to them about what I call musical texture. And I don't even know for sure if that's a term that you're accustomed to, but I'm talking about the layers in the music, the primary line and what else is happening. And we usually boil it down, at least in when we're starting out, to there's a primary line somewhere, a main melody, there's a bass, or the second most important line in the piano, and then there's whatever's left. So we're talking about solo piano music at first. And one time in my intro class, we were looking for a word for the stuff that's neither the top nor the bottom, and they called it middle stuff. So I just call it middle stuff and just credit my students with coming up with that. So it could be figuration of some kind of rhythmic pattern. So there's that idea of figuring out who has what, because as pianists, we have everything. Right? We have all the lines of the music. We don't need to share it with anybody. We do have the constant challenge of making that clear for our listeners, right? What's going on in the music. But I start from there, and I have the students consider solo piano music in layers, because then I say, well, what we're going to do when we put you with a partner, is that you're going to share one line with them, and you're going to do everything else still. So rather than the feeling that all of a sudden they're in the background or in another room or they've got the lid closed, or, you know, there's sometimes these ideas that when you're playing with somebody that it's somehow you've had your rights taken away or something, or your spotlight. I like to think that we're actually sharing just one part of what we do and we're still responsible for the rest. So that's one thing, and I like to go through a couple of little examples that I use with the students and see what you think of those. And then there's the whole idea of being with a partner and impressing upon students who are starting out in this that no matter what you're playing in your own part and how many people there are, you share the pulse. That's the one thing that everybody has in common. And that seems like so obvious in a way, theoretically, but when you're together and you're all playing your own things and having to deal with what you have in your instrument, it's very easy to lose that focus between partners. So just having them understand that that's the thing to share, that's the thing to hang on to. Sometimes using a metronome is not a discipline thing sort of for accuracy so much as it's like a practice buddy or a rehearsal buddy. It can be kind of a rehearsal partner, referee kind of, that just impressing upon the students that that pulse is important and how you convey that to your partner, whether somebody cues or somebody responds. So it's like the real-time aspect of music. And then the third thing has to do with how we use the sound of the piano when we're playing with different instruments. And we have such a wide spectrum, and depending on the instrument you're dealing with, you may have like incredible amount of color possibilities and things. But the way that we play in order to act as if we sustain lines on the piano, like we don't really sustain and carry lines, we make it sound as if we are. When we get with a partner, they can do that. Singers can sustain a line and grow through it, and violinists can, you know, continue with their bow, and wind players can continue with their air. And so they provide a resonance and a continuation that we can't do so much on the piano. So that affects, I think, how we deal with our sound, how we deal with the pedal, how we balance the layers in our parts. And so as time goes on, first of all, I just get the students to understand that they have to listen to what they're doing and how that relates to their partner's sound. But as time goes on, you start to have like specific types of sound that you use with different instruments, like you play the piano differently with a trombone compared to an oboe, compared to a tenor, compared to a guitar, to a double bass, and that you can also, depending on the style you're going to use, or the period of music that you're playing, that's going to change how you use the instrument. So those are kind of the three big topics that I like to keep in view with the students. Before I talk a lot more, let me do a little bit of music. And I just wanted to share with you I'm going to skip over here. So this is an excerpt from a piece you probably know, and you can look at it on the screen. I have to resist the temptation to play it off the wall here. But this is the first of the Kinderszenen, and it's like... Familiar, probably? Okay, so this is where I start talking about the musical texture and finding the primary line, the bass line, and the middle stuff. So for us, I mean, you're probably recognizing those aspects of the music pretty easily. So you have this line here, and it's also a chance to reinforce with the students that for us to play a line, we talk about, at least I talk about, maybe people talk about different things, but we talk about the transfer of the weight, our arm weight, from note to note, and that's kind of how we make a line. And how we use the weight also helps us to shape, but it also allows us to differentiate in the hand if we have two different things that we're doing. Okay, so we pick out the primary line, and then usually the students will pick out that bass line is the complement to the primary line. And I like to also reinforce that you see these things in the notation. I mean, Schumann has shown by the tails in the notes which notes belong to a specific line. And then there's the fun middle stuff. Now, as piano teachers, what do you think the issues will be in dealing with those three parts when you're playing it as a solo piece? What kind of issues might arise that you might address, given that you're splitting 3 lines between 2 hands?
Well, the fact that the middle line's a triplet, and
That's
it's
a
gonna have a drive to it that we don't want to hear.
Okay, so there's a triplet line that gives some flow, but you don't want it to take over, okay? Anything else that strikes you as being maybe a pianistic issue that's going to run into the musical issue? I might be fishing for something.
Probably kind of stomping to one dong, dong, maybe.
Yes, that could be too. Yes, and I'm going to suggest one other thing. So the way that Schumann notated it, he has the triplet shared between the hands. He kind of suggests that you're going to play 2 notes in one hand and 1 in the other, right? So first of all, you want to make them sound as if they belong together. But I think the one that gets everybody is this. Do you hear what I'm doing? I mean, in an ideal world, you don't want to play. Why is it so easy for a young pianist, or any of us really, to have that happen though? What happens in our hands? Yeah.
You're playing the thumb on that last triplet note.
Right.
The thumb is playing it, and it's just,
It's so easy for the thumb to take the weight, right?
yeah, to take the weight.
Right, and so that becomes relevant here. I like to use this as a chance to say, okay, but we understand this line as being the tune and not, right? So it gives them a reason to think about, well, how can I keep the weight on the top line and not let it fall to my thumb, right? So you have something like this. Do you hear what I'm getting at? So this is pretty far from like playing with another person, right? Like this is just basic texture, but it draws their attention. I think it helps them start to think about our piano music being constructed of lines, just like all other music, you know, that is shared between people. And also what we need to do as pianists to make that texture clear. So far, so good? So then the part B to that is, well, Schumann wrote a lot of songs for solo voice and piano, and he wrote pieces for like oboe and piano, violin and piano, horn and piano. So a lot of pieces where one line is in a partnering instrument. So if this line were in the oboe romance or something like that, we'd be playing this. Right? It's conceivable that that would be the piano part. So this is my chance then to say, to remind the students and to think about the fact that as pianists, we're trained to sing with our right hands, right? We spend a lot of time singing with our right hands. And so if the piano part were only this, without the tune, it would be, you know, they might, you know, very diligently learn it like that, and then, of course, it's competing with the partner. So this gives a chance to think about the fact that between those 2 lines, the lower one is the one that means more to the melody, if that makes sense. So if you're imagining playing this with 2 hands, your right hand has to behave and go back into sort of its own deferential place in the sound. So again, what's the connection with collaborative? Well, if you were teaching a lesson on this, you could conceivably say, listen, I'm going to play the top line, and maybe I'll stand beside you and play it up here. And I'll get you to play this part, so you hear those parts without having to juggle in the one hand. And then you can come back and maybe practice this and this. So all the different combinations. I don't know, is that something you would do anyway, or is that something that is in my collaborative brain? I mean, that's something to think of, but I think using music like this and making a connection to giving away a part of the texture is a way to teach an awareness of texture without yet having a partner in the room to play with. The other example, I printed things a little bit out of order in the handout. I apologize for that. I'd like to look at the example that's on the last page of the handout, which is the Debussy, just as a comparison. So this is the opening of one of the preludes of Debussy, Des Passeurs de la Neige. And This is an example that I start them thinking about not only the texture, but what it would be like if it were orchestrated, if there were different instruments. Because I think all of us in piano teaching, there are times when we say, well, think of that as a cello line, or think of that as a violin line. So sometimes thinking of the orchestra colors, it helps them think of what the different instruments are, but also what kinds of sounds we might have from the piano and how that relates to the different lines in the music. So this little example also gives you some interesting things about notation that a composer uses. So you have this. Part, and I'm going to say that there are 3 layers. I don't know if will you buy that? So you've got this one that Debussy's notated with the stems down, and then you've got the one that's moving with the stems up. So I can imagine, I don't know, who would play that in the orchestra? Any idea about what would play like a note in the middle register, long tones? Who might play that? What's that? A wind instrument? Yeah. Yes? Sorry? What did you say? I think you said something.
Winds, but not the brass instruments.
Okay, so maybe not brass. Any other?
Because it's too bright.
You might have a horn on a note like that, too, that was very sort of muffled. But I think I would go with, I mean, we could have different versions, right? But I think that it's possible that one instrument in the orchestra could play it, or a clarinet. It could be various things, right? They could sustain. But then somebody else is with them, either in the same family or a different family in the orchestra. And then you've got this soprano range, treble range line that comes in. Anybody want to decide what Debussy would give that music to? Could be various things. Could be an oboe, could be a clarinet, could be a violin, but it could be a solo instrument even in the orchestra. So there's actually like 3 things going on, even though this looks as if it's really one thing, but you have those 2 pitches. And then I'm wondering if, I'd like to take a look at what happens after the 4th measure. So you have, and then this. We've still got this going on, but it looks kind of different. You see how he's put it? He's written it in the treble. In the treble clef in the left hand. So you, bass clef, bass clef in the right. Right here. So even though it's the same pitches, it looks quite different. Are you with me okay with that? And the reason, I draw folks' attention to that because on the page at first it looks as if the music has changed a lot because of how it's notated, but we still have that line continuing. It's just notated differently. And we have the top line continuing, and then what's Debussy added here? Who might have joined it in the orchestra? Anybody want to give that a label? Hard to guess, right? I think I would be thinking a little bit. I think I hang around a lot with wind players. I could imagine some really high-class trombone players playing the trombone choir in the back of the orchestra. Or it could be divided strings, lower strings, doing that. But that's a new part to the music. Now, the other interesting thing to me in reading the page here is when we get to here, he's notated it that the hand crosses, right? So even though you see that line in the top is continuing, now you're playing with the left hand. Okay, so now what's all this about? So this little example, it can show things to do with the layers again, how you might decide instruments, but also looking at how the music is notated and seeing sort of through the notation to how the lines of music work. Because I think when we're reading music as pianists, sometimes there are things about the visual, especially if we're reading for the first time, that are less than clear about how the music is constructed. And when we have a little look at it, we can see what's going on there instead. Is this kind of making sense? So those are like opening sort of initial examples that I like to give from the solo repertoire. Now, there's just one other I wanted to, and I'm sorry, I'm hopping around a little bit from what I put in the actual handout, but the second one that I did was a Chopin nocturne, opening of the E-flat nocturne. And so, like, there are a lot of nocturnes and waltzes, a number of pieces that we have as solo pianists that have a beautiful line in the right hand, often ornamented, and then the bass and the middle stuff are both in the left hand. So when you have a piece like this, what kind of challenges do you have? What do our young pianists have with something like this? What kinds of things do you run into if they're playing something like this, where you have a melody in the right hand and you have a bass and chords in the left hand? What kind of fun do they have?
Waltz accompaniment.
Pardon me?
The waltz accompaniment.
Yes, it's a waltz. Uh-huh.
It's issue usually.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be loud, so.
It's supposed to, yes, so you're supposed to have the support in the bass, and what happens? Does it go, it reverses sometimes? Or it's all the same? And I find often even, you see, I don't teach younger students now, but I have college and grad students, and they have the same issues, like, oh, there's a big leap. You know, there's things with the jumping around and the coordination. But there are a couple of things, I think, again, that you could, if you're working on a piece like this with a student, it could be a chance, again, to address this idea of melody and accompaniment, and also how the two support each other, and then how the left hand allows for the right hand to do things. Because sometimes when you're with a partner then, if they do something free or expressive, the pianist doesn't know what to do with that. But our left hands are very good at doing that with our right hands. Right? So if you were to play, and you were really expressive, I'm just being extreme here for a second. You know, if you moved it around yourself, your left hand would go with you. Right? So that gives them a chance to hear that those two things can exist together. But it's a great time, you know, to have them do something like this. Because without trying to coordinate the melody line with those accompaniment patterns, it gives a chance to explore what the accompaniment could do. I would say that you can do that just as part of, it's possible to do that as part of teaching a piece like this, and just sort of instilling that sort of curiosity about what goes on in the accompaniment part. But I find myself, if I have something of this nature where I can't, you know, it's hard to coordinate the different parts, if I isolate something like this and hear what I can do with it when I'm not also playing the melody, then when I put them back together, I'm sort of able to listen for it more. I don't know, what do you think? Does that make sense? And so I think that's this style of music. You can use, you can introduce some of these skills a lot of different ways, whether you're thinking of the bass and accompaniment, you're thinking of the shaping of the melody. We often talk about how to shape ourselves, and then if we start to become sensitive to that, we can imagine another partner playing. And this is another place where, as a teacher, well, you could do both ways. The teacher could play the melody, and the student could play the accompaniment part with both hands, or it could swap around and have the student play and see how expressive they can be with the melody without having to play the other parts. So I guess my biggest theme is always imagining the music in different layers and isolating the primary line and then putting these other parts around. Any questions at this point so far? Okay, so let me go back to the basic list of the concepts and things. Oh no, I'm going to go and go to the next page. So this is the other section about kinds of skills. So I've talked a little bit with you about thinking about the texture, thinking of the different layers, and sort of laying the groundwork for pianists to think of music being built in such a way that you can share lines, and you can balance lines. And so we do that in our solo music, and then we do it with partners. You might not even tell them, you don't have to tell them, we're going to learn a collaborative skill now. But if this is something that is part of their learning the music, it can be kind of within their awareness. So I've listed a few things here that we can talk about, things that are aspects of learning music at the instrument that are kind of collaborative skills too. I mean, that you're going to use when you're working with other people. It seems kind of silly, but I mean, the first thing is preparation and practice, right? Because students are always working on music and learning how to practice and prepare their music well. But I think it's pretty safe to say that when you're playing with other people, there's more likely to be a deadline of some kind. In other words, you have a rehearsal coming up, you have a concert with the choir, you have a coaching with the teacher of the partner, you have to have your duet ready for the recital. I'm sure there are always practice goals when you're playing solo, but they're more likely to be goals, immediate goals for learning music when you're working with a partner. And I think part of it also is that because we're not memorizing the music that we play with other people, the way that we prepare the music is a little bit different. And so there are a whole lot of things related to just how you prepare your music and practice it. I have a thing that I call quick study with my students. We talk a lot about, you have to be a good sight reader to be an accompanist. You have to be a good sight reader to be professional. And I like to think, yes, that's true. We have to be able to read things, but I think the thing that connects the final performance to the sight reading is how you improve your ability to study music thoroughly in shorter amounts of time. In other words, how you look at a score, what information you get from the score, how you incorporate that into your practice. I'm always on about quick study, and I had a grad student once ask me, after we'd done a project, like a little quick study assignment, she said, Dr. Gagnon, when is quick study real study? And I just chuckled because they become the same thing. I mean, the quick study is not supposed to be flying by the seat of your pants study, right? It's supposed to be efficient use of the time. And one thing I've found, I've always been pretty good at reading, but even when I was a kid in the music festival, I was much happier doing the quick study category than the sight reading. So you'd have like 2 days to do a little piece and then play it for the audience instead of sight reading on the spot. And I just enjoyed those. And as time went on, like I went to graduate school in Montreal, and the final exam was have a whole sonata that you prepared in 2 weeks with a partner but without a teacher, and then you performed it. So that was kind of, and so now in my program at school, the last thing that my grad students do is they get a piece, they have a week to work with their partner and then present it. When they come in auditioning, I also give them a quick study that it's a much shorter piece, but they have a piece to prepare that they're going to play with a partner in the audition, which is not rehearsed. So I'm sort of checking to see what their reflexes are, and it's so interesting to me that quite often at the auditions, that's one of the strongest things that the students do. Because I think people who enjoy playing with other people maybe have the instinct to make music right away. So anyway, that's a little bit of a tangent, but the idea of how you practice and prepare your music informs how you're going to be working with other people, I think. And I found, even though I'm not teaching youngsters, I'm responding to what the college students are like, and I find there's a lot of disconnection in how well they read, what they're listening to, and how they get around the choreography of the keyboard. And so I'm talking quite frequently about connecting those 3 senses. What they're reading, not only what it sounds like with harmony and melody, but also the quality of the sound, what they're doing with the pedal, what the balance is, all that kind of stuff, and then the actual physical feeling of it. Because there are lots of things in piano music that look like one thing and feel like another. And they may look complicated on the page, but if you can figure out the pattern, think, oh, that's just changing octave, it's the same thing, or it could be anything. So I don't know what I don't know what other teachers do, but I think that incorporating that into any music study, any piano study, is going to help the learning process, which will then come in handy when learning things for other people. So part of my underlying skills practice, I guess, is just how well you read and learn music. Hands up, teachers who have to say, but you could do more dynamics. You could do more with the dynamics. Like, don't you say that to your students? Or, isn't there an accent there? You know, all of these things are, do you know what the tempo marking means? You know? Like, there's all this stuff, right? Like, our lessons, we'd have nothing to teach, it seems at times. So I tend to preach quite a bit about reading the score even away from the piano. And you can do this with little children. I mean, it doesn't have to be complicated music. But so that you've read it, you've seen all the stuff besides the notes and the rhythms, you know, the pitches and the rhythms. In other words, you see the dynamics, the phrasing indications, the articulation, all the expressive markings. So that can be at the beginning of the music to tell you something like an andante or an agitato. It can be the writ and the accel and the allargando and all of those things that might be written in the music, because that tells you how you're going to play those notes and rhythms. And that's the part you share, like when you play with somebody else. So often my students are still, and I do it sometimes too, but you think, I just got to get the notes. That's a very good phrase, right? But that's really not what we're trying to do. We're trying to get the music. So what I'm advocating for is in whatever context, whenever a student is learning music, that order of operations can be different, like the reading part before the playing part. I used to use the example with the students of thinking of looking at the map before you go on the freeway, like so you know you're going off at exit 173 and it's on the left, you know, things like that, or you know that it's 30 miles, or you know that there's, but then GPS came along, and so people don't look at maps. But then again, I think I still use GPS. Say, imagine if we had GPS for playing a piece of music. There's a piano marking coming up. There's an accent on that F, you know, go faster here. But we don't really have that, right? So we have to be our own kind of Siri with the music. So any kind of practice that the students get in any context, in learning scores thoroughly, listening that they phrase every, or they make a shape in every phrase, that they're listening to the ballad, they're listening to what they're doing, they're paying attention to the pedal, like all those aspects of awareness, we can practice in any music. The gap, I think, that it can be a challenge is the gap between how you do that towards a memorized version and how you do that towards continuing to read the score and get with somebody else, because our attention is in different places, right? I used to find like the opposite when I had to memorize a lot, that it was hard for me to go from what the music looked like here to what it looked like on the black and white down here, and relating that spatial awareness to what I'm seeing on the page. So I think that's something to acknowledge. And when some folks say, well, you know, you can practice sight reading or reading a score, you know, blocking out seeing your hands somehow, or you can practice playing with your eyes shut to get familiar with the keyboard. But I think we all have some peripheral awareness of the keyboard, even if we don't look down at it. So I think it's more connecting whatever awareness you have of the keyboard with what you're looking at, if that makes sense. So the sort of choreography that goes on. Because when you're playing with somebody else, you have one more thing, or multiple things connected with the partner that you are thinking about. So you want to have your own awareness really well hooked up so that you know where you're going here, you see how that is on the page, and you're listening to what's going on. So I guess what I'm saying is those skills you can teach without a partner, but it will prepare a student well for working with a partner, whether it's from the standpoint of learning the music or being coordinated in how they're playing. That's kind of a big list of things. Do you have any questions or comments about that, or experiences you might have had with these aspects of learning pieces of music? it's the eternal thing of just trying to figure out how to input all the information. Let me mention also, when you're with a partner, then part of your attention is to the other person. I talk sometimes about having antennae to the other person, sort of being tuned in. And some of that has to do with real-time awareness, like being able to hear their part with yours. But the preparation comes from getting used to seeing their part on the score also. Now, for those who play with choir or with, like in church or in school, they also have to do that, right? They have something that they're going to play, but then they have to pay attention to the conductor. So that's also a skill to be developing, how you're reading the music and how you're getting comfortable enough with that you can also listen to these other things. So, I mean, that's maybe a little harder to practice without being the partner, like you acting as the partner or having a duet partner. But all of us probably can do elementary conducting. We can breathe in cue so that we can develop the awareness of another person that you're responding to. I didn't print this example, but I was going to say that there are, one of the things that you can do if a student is working away on a piece with a partner, and you probably had this experience, but to get familiar with the partner's part before actually playing, you know, you can have something like playing the left-hand part of the partner's part, of the piano part with the partner. So this is a very random selection. It was in my class earlier this week, and it's a setting of I Wonder As I Wander, which is a tune you may know. So the tune is here, and in the piano part, it has these words. And so you could do, just to practice reading those two, because the student who hasn't played with the partner hasn't had a third line to look at. Or the beginning of this song, the first verse is set just with, but the right hand of the part is here, so you could say, take sort of incorporate the parts. I don't know, do you ever teach score reading like that, like more than 2 lines at the same time? Reading a third part? Because that's something that's possible too. The one thing with piano duet music that I find frustrating is that, for this kind of thing, is that the parts are so often printed side by side, right? So you don't see your partner's part in the same way. I have actually, when Brandon comes, I have one short duet piece that I wanted to do with him, and that happens, the publisher printed the parts above and below, like a 2-piano part. Anyway, all right, there was one other thing I wanted to mention here. Yeah. So along with these collaborative skills, the whole idea of having a steady pulse and a shape to a phrase, those are things that we do in all our music. Let me ask you, are there things that you do with your whatever age students, but ways that you encourage them to have a feeling of continuing pulse and phrase shaping? Like, do you ask them just to do that, or do you have certain ways that you help them to feel those things, or do you like clap with them or conduct? What kinds of things might you do?
I invested into a drum set or a small drum or a djembe drum too, especially from the youngest ones, to help them see that the music doesn't end to the double bar line, that you have to keep it going.
Okay, because in our music we have a lot of things that impede the visual progress. Like we have bar lines and we have notes and changes of line. Yeah, okay, so you have an actual rhythm section. And so do they play that while you play the piano, or do they just play on that so you have a feeling of the pulse, or how do they?
Especially when they need to go to triplet times and they're struggling with that, I'll go into an improvisation on the piano while they are just trying to internalize the beat on the drum. And then I try to reverse that to see if they can play their part while I'm on the drum, if we can stay together.
So you can use the drum and the playing. Good. Any other things that any of you do to just encourage continuous playing and phrasing? Not particularly, because I think I talk to the students about, rather than the beat or the tempo, which are part of all this, I use the term pulse a lot, because to me it gives the feeling that it's something alive and something continuous, but also something that isn't necessarily rigid, right? Because our pulse is not always at 73 or 92 or whatever, but it's continuous. And so, and that's the thing that you're going to share with the other person. The other idea of a phrase shape, I find pianists are good at not shaping phrases. We're just good at not shaping phrases because we have a lot to do, and our instrument doesn't require us to like bow through a line or blow through a line. We know that we can't naturally increase or decrease the sound. It just kind of does what it. So it's great to encourage the students always to look for a shape. And if they don't know how to shape the phrase, they can try it 5 different ways. Go to the second measure, go to the fourth measure, go to the third measure, you know, until they feel a phrase shape that kind of makes sense. But thinking always of shape, because then that's something that they can do with their partners also. And so between those two things, I think even at the piano, and as you're saying, you know, whether you team up with them in some way or have them team up with one another, they can start to have that feeling of that sort of alive process of breathing and shaping a line or keeping a pulse moving that's shared. And I just think that's not always natural for pianists, but it's natural for musicians. So we can encourage that, and then it sets them up to play with their partners. Yes?
So my current issue is when they are concentrating so hard to play their part well to keep that pulse, then they take over the volume. They don't have any more balance than on who should be the primary and who should be, because to me it shows me that they're concentrating. They're working so hard that they push into their sound, and trying to get them to back off has been difficult.
Yes. So what do you do for them? How do you get them to listen as well as focus on?
Well, I asked another experienced teacher. She tries to video them and let them hear it themselves, because they won't recognize it while they're doing it.
Yes,
so
yes.
I've been doing a lot more voice memos and let them listen back.
This morning, as I was getting ready, I drove here last night, stayed over, and because I had a late rehearsal last night for a concert tomorrow, and it's a new partner, so you had used the voice memo for 2 hours, and while I was getting dressed, I was listening to because I still, it's so much easier to tell what's going on, like you say, when you're actually playing. So how do the students respond when they've heard themselves?
They grin, they smile, they have, it's a self-awareness.
Yes.
But especially if they're the bass part, and they have these beautiful long strings that we love to use, those bass strings, how do we back off from that? And so we'll see next week how well they worked on that part.
Right. So this isn't getting ready for your duet recital, and yeah.
To integrate more dynamics and interesting sounds.
Yeah. So and perhaps there's an aspect of that that physicality, like feeling what it feels like to play at the different levels, and then practicing doing that while being aware of the pulse, so that it's a gesture. I don't know if that's probably part of what you're
playing with his sister. And so it's much easier to get aggravated at your sister than at yourself to try to keep the balance going. So.
And you see that opens up a whole other thing that I didn't even put on the list particularly. Well, I did. Communication and awareness. There it is. So you're monitoring the parts, but you're relating to other people. But what I didn't put down as a sub-point is dealing with other people. And that starts with your teacher or your sibling and goes to other people. Because I think the more you actually work with other people, the more it is as much about figuring out how to relate to that person, either musically or otherwise, as it is actually playing with them. And if you figure out one, the other, they sort of inform each other. So the very fact that you recognize that they're siblings and that enters into how they're playing, that's just how it is, right? So which is the one, how does the aggravation show up in the person who needs to defer a bit?
But because in our studios, as the teacher, we normally play a secondary bass part. I found out that a lot of them don't know how to play the bass part well. That's one of the things I learned recently. And so, again, they get louder and louder to push their point that this is how it should be. And it's overpowering the sister who's on the upper register.
So it's like they're delivering the dynamic as well as the rhythm. Is that, well, I bet the recording will help. I bet that'll help a lot. Yeah, because it's also, on the good side of it, if the idea that you're thinking about the layers of the music and how they fit together, I like to think that that allows us to work towards the team product, like regardless of whether the violinist or the pianist has the tune, that it's going to be the primary line that you relate to. Sometimes that can help with the personnel, but not always, you know. But if there's an idea that the blend is going to be the team product and whatever each of us has to do in order to create that, I think that's what you're after, right? And what you're doing. Yeah. Other comments about anything to do with teaching phrasing and and pulse and those sorts of things? Okay, cool. I think. Let me just do one more thing, and then we'll maybe take a little break. Yeah, okay. The last thing I just wanted to introduce, this is actually the second page. Boy, I really did a great job in the ordering. But this is, again, something that I do with the students. There are two companion examples on the page that you have. They're both excerpts from a violin sonata by Mozart. And so the first one is from the opening of the slow movement, and the second example that you have on your page is the return of that material later in the movement, sort of recap in the slow movement. Now this is an excerpt of, this is not a piece that the students play at this point when I introduce this to them. I give them the printed example. It's a little bit longer actually, but I give it to them and I ask them to use different colors to show primary and secondary and middle stuff, so that they do kind of a color exercise on musical texture. So I didn't set it up high-tech enough to demonstrate that, but I can narrate it a little bit. So this first example, I think you can see that, as you might expect, in the opening of a violin sonata movement, the violin has good potential for being the primary line. So if you just even look at the score, I think, or on your handout, you can see that the violin has the melody for that first 8 measures, and the piano has. And it has some nice stuff, this nice counter melody, but it doesn't have the primary line. And then in the second half, some of the more astute observers in the class will notice that this rhythm in the left hand that Mozart uses teams up with the violin. But it's still supporting. And if you can see, I don't know what's more visible, the tiny print on your page or the bottom here behind the piano lid, but at the end of the excerpt, when the violin goes, and then the piano takes over, and then the piano takes the line here. Okay, so that's pretty, and then it continues. Now the second example that's below that, where it says start here, this is the recap, and I think you can see again that the violin has a version of the tune. Do you see where it goes? Where does it go next? The tune. Goes to the piano. See how that works? And so Mozart decided to mix things up again, switch things up a bit. So he puts it up there, and then in the third measure, the violinist is going from this beautiful primary line to playing a very deferential kind of accompanying line. But then the piano has this. And then in the very next measure, the beginning of the second line, the violin's back to being primary, just like it was in the opening. And then look what happens. The piano takes over. Now, if the violinist learned the part and the pianist learned the part, and if the violinist didn't look at the whole score and the pianist didn't look up the violin part, they might get to rehearsal, and when they got to this part here, you might hear the violin going, as if, you know, I'm the violinist, I have the primary line, and you might have the pianist going, you know, just continuing to accompany. And so I use this as an example for them just to look at the score. And I say, well, you can play through things or sing through, but you don't need to learn the part. But it gives them a reason to look at all three lines, the two piano lines and the single line of the violin, and see how a composer can move things around. This is just kind of a cool example because he does 2 and 2 like that in the second version of the phrase. And then the longer excerpt I give them to look at has some more sort of parallel exchanges. But they seem to have, they have a good time using the colors, and then they have a good time arguing about what the parts are that are 2, 3, and 4. In other words, the ones that aren't primary. Because if you look in this example here, it's like, well, I would vote for eating the bass, but this is kind of interesting in the top. But, you know, really I need this. You know, there's lots to choose from. So, and I just tell them, you know, I don't mind if we don't all have the same opinion, but now you at least are seeing that there are different elements in the way the score is put together. So, I don't know where this would fit into your piano training, but if you are introducing pieces with other instruments, with partners, it's conceivable that there might be something you could look at purely from the standpoint of score study without actually playing it. And that would give them a chance to do a bit of analysis that it's what I would call like a performance analysis or a collaborative analysis. It's not the harmonic analysis, but it's just an analysis of who has what at any given point. And that starts to clarify their understanding of the whole score. Cool, gosh, it's already 11 o'clock. Any questions or comments right now? As I say in my class, any complaints or requests? Okay, that's good. So let's take, it's what, 10:56. Let's say like 11:05 or so. I'm going to see if Brendan is here. And then we'll do a little bit of hands-on and see where that takes us. Okay? Thank you. And I'm just going to get a drink of water myself. I'm just going to introduce you and then see what we're doing next. There you go.
Good job.
All right. Okay, welcome back. We now have with us Brendan Smith, who's a student of one of my former students at School of the Arts, James Rice, who teaches, I believe, in the Durham, Raleigh whole area, Chapel Hill. And I was just looking for somebody to be a guinea pig and a demo person. So Brendan was kind enough to agree. So what we're going to do is I've asked him to come with one of his solo pieces, and he has Girl with a Flaxen Hair, the Debussy Prelude. He's going to play a little bit for us, and then I'm just going to talk with him a bit about texture and line and some of the stuff we've been talking about. And then I sent him a little quick study, a four-hand quick study, and I'm going to give you I have copies of that music for you. And we're just going to take a romp through how to deal with a four-hand quick study. The one thing I did cheat with this is it's from a group of four-hand duets, like I mentioned earlier, that are printed one part above the other. So it's just a little bit easier to see the two parts together. It's a Baron-Reiter kids publication. So Brendan, may I give you the stage and let you play, and understand that you're just giving us something to work with. So it's wonderful that you're able to do that for us. Okay? And I'm just going to take this music, but get it your way. We've been talking a lot about the layers in the musical texture. I don't know if you're a teacher and you ever talk about that, where the melody is, what's accompanying the melody, and how to maneuver those things. Is that something you talk about sometimes?
Yeah, I do think so.
There are some inconvenient places in this piece, aren't there? Like, you get to play the tune all by itself at the beginning, and then there are places where there's all this other stuff and it kind of impedes a little bit, right? So what I'd like to do is just look at a couple of places to see how, at the piano, we can get the melody line to be sort of more easily expressed and not sort of weighed down by other things that are happening, okay? The other thing I'm wondering is whether, do you have, when you start the piece, do you have in mind any particular sound for the melody? Like, do you think of it being a piano sound or a singer or a violin or a flute or anything like that?
There was one particular flute arrangement that I remember hearing that kind of stuck with me. So I tend to think of that by default.
And there's also some other nice flute writing by Debussy, right?
Yeah.
That he's in an orchestra. Yeah, flute is a perfectly. I've actually played with this as a trumpet arrangement, if you can imagine. I'm a good trumpet player with a lot of finesse, but I've played that. So it's a piece like many of our solo pieces that can be arranged for an instrument plus the accompaniment, and that can give us some inspiration, right? So let me ask you to do a couple of things, and again, I just appreciate your being a guinea pig. So I'd like you to just play the very first phrase, and all I'd like you to do is when the chords join the solo line, be sure that you let the solo line continue to sound the way it did without the chords, so the same kind of quality and shape. All right, and see if you can just imagine that can be separate, even though you're having to do the two things together. Good. Now that was great because you brought out the top. You kept the top part coming out a little bit more. Is it possible to make the chords be a little bit more? Not so much in the background, but a different color, like a bit muted color. So, for example, if you're thinking of that flute player, who might play the other notes besides the piano? Who would be a nice accompaniment for that opening?
Perhaps like a small string ensemble, possibly?
I think that'd be good. So would you play those chords as if you're a small string? Just play the chords by themselves? As if you're a small string ensemble. It's pretty nice. That's a nice quality. Try that again. Now, can you play it with the fingers in your right hand that you'll use when you also play the tune? Good. And then can I get you to just experiment with making the bass a little bit more supportive, the very lowest note? Talking about this with the folks for. I'm going to play the tune one time, see if I can, so that you can play only the chords there, okay? So I'm just going to play with you, da-da-dum, ba-da-dum, okay? And I'll play it an octave up. So you don't get to play the topmost note. Right, okay, ready, and... One more time. Okay, now you try it in your register as it's written and see if you can get that string orchestra to do its thing. Very good, and you almost have the perfect blend. Just think of what your pedal is doing too. And see what happens if you put the pedal later. Just see what happens. And can the string orchestra be a little bit more letting the flute come out in top, so just be a little bit calmer? What do you think? Is it changing a bit? Had you thought about that before, Brendan, of making the chords a different sound? Is that something you already do?
Not in the sense that I would pick apart like the lowermost notes to bring out a bit.
What do you think of that? Is that just clutter?
No, I think it works. I think it gives it a bit more depth and fullness that maybe you wouldn't get otherwise.
Yeah, I think it's worth trying out. And then as the piece continues, there's lots of places where the tune is continuing and there's other stuff to play, and just to keep them separate. But I wanted to look at one place, and that's this line here, which is tricky to play, right? A little bit tricky to play, but you're doing very well with it. It's a few measures in. Brandon, would you? Sorry, it's a little bit tricky here for me. Would you play just this section here, if you would? Yeah. Good. Now I'm going to ask you. He's doing a second piano. I'm going to ask you to jump up for a second. play. Piece of cake, right? And then you've got the piano player, a little chord, right? It's kind of tricky. So can you think about when you're there, you're going to carry the weight. So do you talk about transferring the weight of your hand sometimes?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you can do, and then, did you hear, I didn't use any pedal. That's the hardest part, is not using pedal to practice that. I mean, you'll use some pedal eventually, but. So you feel as if you're going to transfer from there to there. Okay, and then you can add in. It'll drive you a little crazy if you keep it dry like that with the pedal, but eventually, does that sound a little bit more continuous?
Yeah.
You see what I'm, do you practice, maybe you've been practicing this and it's on its way.
Not
really
with this particular strategy, although I have used it with other pieces where there's a lot more moving notes.
Uh-huh. So just try for me, just one little snippet. I'd like you to try this. Just that, with those fingers that you're using eventually. And see if you can get the line to be as continuous as possible, even with the pedal. That's pretty good. Do that again. Now when you go, when you were a kid, because you're all grown up now, when you were a kid, do you ever use the monkey bars, the sort of horizontal monkey bars in the playground where you kind of swing? It's like, and if you wanted to be a hero, you'd like skip a rung. Sometimes people would do that instead of just going one to the next. They would kind of, but it's a little bit like being like on a trapeze kind of thing, right?
I don't remember ever being that daring.
Well, you have to be daring now, because what I'm thinking of is when you transfer, when we have to go like this, and we actually have to leave the keyboard, we have to pretend that gravity is going to help us go from one to the next, that our arm is going to help us. So you have to have courage to let go at the last instant and grab at the first instant. Okay? Just try one more time, because you're almost there. Yeah, one more time. That was good. Yeah, and what's good? That was good. Now, what's the advantage on black notes for doing something like this? What's helpful?
Perhaps the fact that they're like slightly elevated.
Yeah, because you can play them like sideways, right?
Yeah.
So you have more chance to grab them or to land on them, I guess. Okay. So here's the test then of your legato. Can you add the inside note? Just the right hand, and add the inside note, and still do that nice connection. Yeah, take your time. Yeah, try with your pedal. Just be courageous. Don't go too fast. And can you make sure you're breathing still? Now, if you can do that without the pedal, it's going to be a piece of cake when you put it in context. But you see how if you do that in each of those instances, as your hand changes position, then you'll keep the line intact. Do you want to, this is a little bit of a fast forward, but would you try this part just a little slower than your regular tempo? But just play that measure as it's written and see if you can let that melody line be carried by your weight.
Oh, with pedal or?
You can use pedal, yeah, but keep using the weight too. Great, now the first one we've done a little bit more on that one, so it was really quite continuous. The second and third one, you left a little soon because you needed to move. But I bet if you try it again, because I think you heard it. Yeah, just let your arm move. That's right, that's right. Now that's really good, very good. So try just one last time the whole little section there. Good, now here's the bonus round. What happens a dee-da-da. So you're doing the last note before the move a little quickly, and then there's a teeny gap, but more importantly, I don't hear as much sound on the arrival note. So I'm hearing dee-da-da-da instead of dee-da-da-dee. So can you have it's just a little bit of extra patience and a little extra courage. See if you can do it. Can you land a little bit more heroically on the E flat? Yeah? Great. Now, can you combine the heroism with gentleness on the notes just before, the moving notes? Almost. There. Except that I'm like nattering at you. What's the difference in what you're focusing on compared to when you played through? Can you tell what is different, that's making the sound different?
I think the very first time I played it, I was very concerned with like how I was timing everything. And where I was like stretching the time and compressing it a little for a more musical quality. But now I think I'm more focused on like making sure the melodic arc is going where it should be, and in a way that gives a bit more freedom, because like the clarity comes from that rather than like using timing.
That's so, I didn't tell him to say this. You must have a good teacher.
Yeah.
No, a slight translation, or maybe like the more generalized version, that it sounds to me what you're saying is that you're paying attention to sound a little bit more for expressiveness than timing.
Right.
And those are our two things that we have, right? We feel expressive if we take time, or we feel expressive with a special sound, and ultimately we kind of combine the two. But I mean, that's a very good bunch of adjustments that you've made to make that melody. It's a beautiful, like the whole piece has a beautiful melodic line, right? So ultimately, if you have that happening, then you can decide sometimes to do something with time also, right? I was just, in that particular place, asking you to separate what the melody's doing from this encumbrance of the chords, right, and the change of hand positions. So that relates to the theme of the musical layers in the primary line, regardless of how you have to play it in order for that to happen. So it gives you a reason to figure out how to play it, right? And it involves your weight, it involves the pedal, those sorts of things. Do you have any questions about any of that little tutorial?
Not really. Like, are there any other like practicing strategies you would recommend for like achieving that, other than what you just showed me?
Let me think. Well, one of them is certainly playing the melodic line or the inside separately and seeing if you have control of those. The other is you could think about, as you get more comfortable, how do you actually want the phrase to be shaped? Like, do you want to go yo ba da dee, do you want 3 little units, or do you want a longer stretch of it? And I think you could probably continue to refine what you do without the pedal and what you do with the pedal. But I think the main thing is what you've already done, which is to understand the continuing melodic line, even though we have the hand position changes. Does that kind of make sense? So the last thing I'm going to ask you, just to try and emphasize, is at the very beginning, you want it to be quiet, right? And you want to have a beautiful sound on that first note. Problem is the piano sound dies, and that's like the longest note in the melody. So is it possible for you to imagine, like you can be breathing, and you can give yourself a cue, and then play that first note as if it's going to last, right? So can you make it have beautiful sound that is going to last until you move?
some reason I don't remember the name of the instructor, but he was telling me that like for sustaining notes, it's often helpful to like almost like move your wrists along with like the way that the string is resonating.
Yeah.
Almost.
Yeah.
So I tried that.
Good. You weren't holding your breath either, right?
Yeah.
That was good. Yeah. So this idea of a follow through, right? Yeah. So that way you can deliver a little bit more of your physical weight or energy or whatever, but it doesn't have a front edge to it either, right? It still is gentle. That was much, and the thing I appreciate, I don't know if you all could see, but he prepared, right? He was like, okay. Then he prepared, and then it arrived much more clearly. So good for you. Good for you. Any questions from the floor before we have our four-hand adventure? Okay, I appreciate you doing that for us. That's just a little bit, I realize, but maybe it'll apply as to the piece. So the selection I gave Brandon. Have you got it handy there, Brandon? No, Brandon, sorry.
I have it.
You have it right there, like because I have it also.
I think I put a copy of it.
Okay, I have another copy. I'm just going to give copies to the folks so they can follow along. It's not complicated, but I think it'll be a lot easier to understand what we're doing if you just see it. So it's this whimsical, what shall we do with the drum and fiddle? Okay, and Brendan looked a little bit at I'll bring the other bench over. Sorry, I'm not really getting my coordination of the choreography here. Okay, how about, I'm going to switch benches with you, okay? So how about we move this one over, and we'll face them this way, and then you can sit on this one. There we go. No, well, we'll sit on the ends maybe if you can dare to do that, and that way it'll be easier. There we go. Okay, now we're set up. When you practice it, did you move to one side like this?
I don't think so.
Okay. Okay, we're going to try. But what I want to do first is I want to talk about what's going on in the music. All right? So I've been preaching today about finding the primary line in the music and then basing everything else on that. So where does do you know where the tune starts, Brendan?
Out here?
Yeah, so it's up in my part. Where is the actual melodic line? Because it's not really, that's really not the melodic line, right? So where is it?
It's like the right and left hand kind of trade off, and it's in this, like...
Yeah, it's here. Right? Okay, so it's embedded there. Now, did you ever get the tune when you played through your part?
Not until much later, like here.
Right.
And it was only for about 4 minutes.
Right. So, but you get it there in the at the end of the second system. Would you be able to play us the tune in your part? Now, could you play only the tune like I did?
Well,
Yeah.
This.
Then it doubles, right? But that's it. Okay. So I know now that when I get there, you got the tune. So I better get out of your way. Okay. All right, so if I've got the tune here a lot in this first section, what on earth are you playing down there? How does that fit into things, do you think?
I think I'm just outlining the chord, really.
Okay. Is there anything in your part that I couldn't really live without? Like, what's the best part of your part that goes with my part in the opening?
I guess perhaps the bass notes.
Yeah. Why don't we can we do just a couple of measures with your left hand and my tune? Okay? Now, are you used to cueing? Do you play forehand sometimes?
I've done it once or twice.
Okay, so for now I'm going to breathe, but then I'm going to ask you to do the cueing in a minute, okay?
Okay, so are we starting like after?
We're going to do
or-
just this much, and I'm going to play only the tune, and you're going to play just the bottom. Okay? Ready? Okay, good. That's pretty good. Can we do it with just your bass? Okay, ready, and. Okay, so that's the basic material there, right? Okay. Now, when you were playing on your own, did you wonder where the tune was? Or did you play through my part also?
at first I did wonder, but I kind of sight read-ish this part, so.
So you could have an idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's fine, right? That's exactly what we were talking about. If you have a partner's part, you want to investigate what the other person has, so you aren't totally surprised, right? Okay, now, is there any part of your part that was giving you any kind of issues? That you want to do a little sectional before we do something?
The only part really is, this is a bit of a quick turnaround.
Uh-huh.
From like playing the melody and then doing it.
Okay, so let's take a little look at that. So Brendan's looking at the second system of music, his second, third, and fourth measures, right?
Yeah.
So you just mentioned that you have the tune there like you do at the end of the line with me, right?
Yeah.
And then it's going from here. So would you play a little bit for us, and I'll see if I can help. Okay, so when he got there, at that measure, he played all with his left hand. What could you do besides play it all with your left hand?
Yeah, I could split that.
Now, would that make things any easier in the next measure? Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have any gut feeling as to why you played that with, all with your left hand? Because that's a logical thing to do. Why would that happen?
I guess I wanted to keep the line as continuous as possible.
Right, because you could see that was the tune.
Yeah.
But it's actually easier between the hands. Okay, so that's a good, that refers to the thing about not always splitting, left right. And now, just notice that the fellow who arranged this, he actually put those in the upper staff. So as maybe a suggestion, it might also just, various reasons he might have done that. But I think it maybe is to help indicate the hand. Okay, now, what else do we need to know before we start this? We should check, although we did play little snippets, we should check about tempo, and we should check about dynamics when we make a plan. What tempo are you comfortable with that goes with a vivace and with a title like What Shall We Do with the Drunken Sailor? What's comfortable for you today?
Let's see. I guess.
Oh, you're energetic. Are you up for that?
Well, okay, we could do a little solo.
Okay. We could pick a practice tempo because we haven't played together before. Okay. But the vivace part is really telling us to make it lively, right? It's not presto.
Okay.
So how about we go with, this is not the only drunken sailor in the group. How about we'll decide they're all just a little bit swashbuckly, Okay, so, all right, so we'll figure, and you're gonna give the tempo when you start. And then it looks as if it starts a little in the distance and then gets louder, right? We sort of wind it up and then it's bigger, marcato. And then here, he's given me an indication to get out of your way, I think. When I have the MF for a little bit, and then we come back to the forte. So there's not a lot of extra information, additional information. There are a few accents. There's a couple of stresses and accents. You've noticed that already, right? The octave lower. Okay. So, do you feel like a rond?
Sure.
All right. I haven't played this for quite a while, so you're ahead of me. Okay. Are you okay doing pedal? Do you want me to do pedal? Do you want to play without pedal? We could try without pedal once.
Yeah, maybe we can do it without.
Yeah. Okay. So you give me a tempo that you think we can both manage.
Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Good. Now that's a great tempo. Would you breathe when you want me to come in? Yeah.
1, 2.
tricky for you at the end here? Again, switching, right?
Yeah, it's similar to up there.
Okay, so let's take a look, and I'm going to look at mine too. So what will help you notice what's going on there?
Let's see. I guess.
Yeah, so reading your part and sort of being your neighbor here for a second, I think what happens, it's a little confusing, is here, you get here, and you get here, but then you have to change position. So your right hand is going to go, the lowest note of your right hand is going to become the top note of your left hand. And then maybe, what would happen if you did this, went down and changed your position? See what that's like. Yeah, does that help? And then we can slow down a little bit at the end. Yeah, I mean, when you have repetitions, when you have something that's different, it's sort of catching up there. And I'm going to ask you, this is what I missed when I got to the end here. I forgot that up in the octave, I still had this. So that I wasn't being very clear with that, and then I didn't remember to... Sorry. So I wasn't paying attention to my own part here. But now I've reminded myself the tune is there. Now, you could help me with that too earlier when you get to this one. Even though you've got, is it possible for you to show us a little bit more? So those notes are project a little bit more. Try that, and we'll do it together because I'll do it in my octave. Ready, and. Yeah, so that just makes it a little clearer. How are we doing? Okay, cool. So how about we do two things? Let's do the very end part, because we both need to practice that. But we'll do a little under tempo, but we can do it together, okay? So we'll start from, well, why don't we do from here? We'll go a little bit under, so, yum, ba, ba, bum, ba, ba, bum, bum, bum. Let's try that together and see how we manage, okay? Ready, and. If you want to bring out your bass to go with my very high stuff, that might sound cool too. Okay, let's try it. Ready, and. Thank you for hearing my bass note and being with me at the end. Yeah, good. So we did the rit. That's pretty good, eh? For a day or so, not very much time. Yeah. Okay, now, when we just did that just now, what helped for you to bring the pieces together? Like, is there anything, I was kind of doing a little bit of a GPS through it, right? Bring your attention to something. What?
I mean, I guess I was subdividing a bit more in my head.
Uh-huh.
That might have helped.
Mm-hmm. We sorted it a couple of places so that the line would work, but that you were also organized, right? Sometimes it's hard to be like in this place here. We sorted that out. Mm-hmm. And did you already have the idea of where the tune was? Had you worked that you kind of worked that out on your own, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Good. So let's try one more rendition, and we were talking about time and sound. So we're not going to go super fast, but we're going to sound super lively. Okay, so it's going to be good, sort of sparkly articulation and stuff. Does that sound okay? Okay, so I'm going to let you start again, and I'll take your tempo. Oh, but you can't count this time. Oh, I didn't tell you you couldn't count, but this time you can't count. pretty good, huh? Yeah, I got to practice to keep up with you on this one. Boy, good. Now, that was very good, and Brendan, you gave a good cue. Now, why do you think I said not to count off? There's kind of two reasons, but.
I'm not sure. I guess in that case I had to be more intentional about my breath at the beginning.
Well, I mean, the breath is always a nice way to communicate, but you don't often hear, like, if you went to a concert and there were people playing forehand, you probably wouldn't hear them go, 1, 2. They probably wouldn't do that, right? So the thing is that, the first thing is that when we cue with a breath, we can do that in rhythm. But the other thing in this particular case is I don't play the first measure, so you get to establish the tempo. And once you start, it's too late for me to argue, okay? But because you have the first measure, you give me the tempo. So the breath tells me we're starting, so that's good. And it tells me your intention, but then you give it to me for sure, okay? But that's good. Yeah, the breath is a universal cue, whatever instrument you play, right? Good. Do you have any questions?
Not really, no.
Okay. Well, I'm going to let you stop being demo partner, and I'm going to finish up this presentation. You're welcome to be here for a few more minutes, and we can chat at the end. Is that okay?
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah. Let's thank Brendan. All right, thank you. All right. Any questions or comments arising from our little adventures? Is that, yes?
What did you say about the breath? That the two people playing together, it's their breath that helps kind of coordinate things?
Well, I was asking him to breathe at the beginning and not to count to give me the tempo. And so what I would, and I would say not even just at the beginning, but anywhere in a piece of music, if you're going to cue something, the breath tells us without any sound, really, when we hear the breath, but you can do it in rhythm. So even though in this particular case we were not starting together, he can go, you know, and if you wanted a different tempo, we would go, or if you wanted a really loud tempo, you know, there are different ways that you can do that, but you can, regardless of what instrument you play. Like sometimes I find instrumentalists want to cue with their instrument, right? They want to show with the violin or they want to show with the trumpet, and that's fine too, but I don't want them to do it at the expense of their setup. Because if they're ready to play and they got the bow where they want and then they have to move their instrument just to tell me when they're going to play, that to me is disruptive. But they can be here ready to go and go, and then I know. So that's really all I mean, and I think it's good for pianists to know that they can breathe, period, because we tend to not do that. Does that make sense? Okay. Well, I think we're almost at the end of the time here. I'm going to speed back through a few of my slides here, and I just want to remember a few little things I wanted to mention, and these may be things you're already doing. So here I listed, this is on your handout, we talked about various things we can do as a student's teacher, and we just did a couple of those. But just other experiences that you might introduce depending on the situation with your students and whether they're doing stuff in school or in church or what the context is. But reading lead sheets, you know, any kind of musical theater work or jazz work, reading lead sheets is another skill that you can dabble in. And get really good at if somebody's really interested in the styles that are available there. Having students pick a tune and make up accompaniments to it, that allows just a little bit of additional freedom, you know, at the keyboard. And this sounds really silly, but I make even my graduate students, they have to be able to play Happy Birthday and the national anthem by ear. They need to know the key to start in, they need to know the basic harmonies. It's an actual assignment. Because that's about the first thing. If you're in a crowd, it's like, is there a doctor on this airplane? And if you're at a festive occasion, is there anybody who can play Happy Birthday? You know, so that's sort of a side skill, but it's something that I think everybody can learn to do. And I'm kind of curious about other things. You've shared some things with me already. Are there any other things you wanted to share with your colleagues about collaborative skills or experiences that you have with your students? Offhand, or you might talk after. And the last thing I just, some of these we've talked about, but for students who either seem as if they, you know, they're actually really enjoying playing with other people, or they have the opportunities. We've mentioned these already. Preparing music with somebody in their family or with a friend, opportunities they might have in church or in school. As one of you has said, that you have partnerships with other teachers, that you can do that with colleagues. And then these days, you know, there are summer programs that allow students to to go to a festival where they're collaborative piano festivals or collaborative piano programs even in the summertime. So, you know, depending on the age and stage of your students and what kinds of interest they're showing, there are things like that might be in their futures. So, just sort of mentioning those ideas. So, I don't know, I really preach about these things, but obviously I'm preaching to the converted because I have a feeling that you all are interested in this. But I think whether it's working on the skills of learning the music well, sharing with other people, understanding the texture, it all allows all of us to learn a bit more music in less time. It just makes the process a little bit more efficient. And I think enjoyable, because then you find ways to solve things, like what Brendan did today when we knew there was a tune there and we found a way to organize how to play it at the piano so that the musical phrase was intact. And we looked in the forehand at things that made that a fairly quick learn. You get to play more, like when you're in, at least when I was in school, it's like, are you going to be, I don't want to be a concert pianist. And it's like, I've played more concerts than I ever would have as a soloist, like, there are lots of opportunities to play, is what I'm saying. And if you can feel comfortable in various contexts, then there's lots of that to do. And I'm sure you'll have more ideas. But I appreciate your having come today and joining me in this little adventure. I gave those handouts. I also brought with me, it's a handout that was shared with us at, let me go back one step. The last page of your handout has some resources. That's what I meant to say. And on that, some of them are just video links. Like I have a few we did a few when we were in the pandemic, that we did videos that we could send to schools. So I have a few of those. There are some by colleagues that I've listed there. And then there's a collaborative piano blog, and there's IKCAS, which is the International Keyboard Collaborative Arts Society, which was formed during the pandemic for all of us stranded collaborative pianists. So anyway, there are resources to find online, but one of the ones I also mentioned, I made a copy of a handout at the conference this year for the IKCAS. A woman from New Mexico, I believe it was, talked about skills to teach to pianists, and she had like a nice little handout that she gave us of different things she could do with students. And she just kind of said, I did this presentation at MTNA too, and like it's out there, so if you'd like to take a copy of that too. That's her work. I want you to understand that it's hers, but I like to share that. And I have a couple of copies of a couple of the texts that I mentioned that are a little bit older, that have been in print now for a little while. And I would be remiss in not helping my colleagues by just randomly telling you that on the 12th of November at our school, we have a piano day. So we've been advertising that through MTNA, through NCMTA, but if you have students that would be interested in it, you're certainly welcome to come. And I take part with them too. I do some of the mini lessons and then meet with the students and so on. And we'll have a concert of the faculty. But I so appreciate your being here, and I hope we'll be in touch again. If there's anything that I can assist with, I'd be happy to do that. Any last questions? Yes?
So this What Shall We Do, what book did that come from?
It's the, I think I listed it on that last page by Baron Writer. If I didn't, I need to do that for you. Maybe I didn't list it. I prepared parts of this very quickly. Okay. It's a duet book for young pianists published by Baron Writer, but I need to, I'd have to, yeah, it's not there. Okay, so I need to send that to you. Yeah. Because it's, yeah, there are probably 25 or 30 pieces in that book. Yeah. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you very much, and thank you for those who listened on the live stream or who listened subsequently. Bye now. Thank you. I guess he'll cut me off.
Baron Writer?
Yes.
How do you spell that?
Reiner. Yeah, with an umlaut over A. It's a German German publisher.
Yeah, what's it called?
What's that?
The title of the book?
I don't know precisely. I
okay.
was I had copies already from class, and so I just brought them with me.
Yeah, that was great.
But let me make note of it, because I can
Yeah.
send it along.
And so her handout is,
Yeah.
you said is on the iPad.
I've got it here. I made some
Oh,
copies.
yes.